Welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Policy Development and Scrutiny Panel. So welcome everyone to the meeting. Just a reminder that this meeting is being webcast. So please, when we do speak, can we introduce ourselves for anybody who is watching out there? I'm Councillor Robin Moss and I'm chair of this panel. Are we okay now to read out the emergency evacuation procedure?
Yep. When the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. Designated exits are signposted, arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people.
Thank you very much. With apologies for absence and substitutions, can I just briefly say, first of all, a thank you to Ian Halsall, who stepped down from this panel, and welcoming Stuart Bridge, who has joined this panel. And Hal McPhee has stepped down from this panel as well to join the climate panel. So we do have a temporary vacancy from the Lib Dem group. Are there any other apologies for absence?
Apologies from Councillor Colin Blackburn, who's been substituted by Councillor Sean Hughes.
Thank you very much. There are no declarations of interest. I've been notified. If anything comes up during the discussions and anyone feels they should make a declaration, please do so we can record that for the minutes. We have got no urgent business agreed by the chair, but just to report that at a recent meeting of the chairs and the vice chairs of all three scrutiny panels, there was a discussion about cross-cutting issues. I think an example of that is home-to-school transport, which we are talking about a bit later on. And it was agreed if officers are not sure which panel to send a matter to be scrutinised, they shouldn't delay. They should just come to panel chairs and we'll decide which panel it will go to and extend an invitation to the other panels to attend when there's overlapping. So, on that, then moving to councillor statements. Councillor Karen Walker. Karen.
Thank you, panel members and chair. And I always like to be prepared, chair. I just like to say that. Each year, we see millions of pounds being spent on numerous projects across the local authority, all of which are carried out with the desire to invest in our communities and to improve the quality of life for our residents. We are grateful that the Council uses a budget setting and discussion process that allows all councillors to contribute and make representations on behalf of their constituents. It's for this very reason I am submitting this statement on behalf of myself and Councillor Gavin Heathcote. And these items for consideration in the 26-27 Council budget. Each week we spend time out in our community knocking on doors, meeting residents and finding out what their desires and aspirations are for Peasdown St John. This is their wish for the following council budget setting: 50,000 for Bath Road pavement resurfacing, 50,000 for pedestrian crossing on Orchard Way, 7,000 for Dunkerton Hill Ashgrove speed limit reduction, 50,000 to resurface Old Kills Hill, 60,000 to resurface Braesdown Lane, that is from the bypass to the Braesdown allotments, 30,000 to resurface Whitebrook Lane, that is from the Cricket Club to the Camerton Cattery, 15,000 for a new VS sign reductions to on Bath Road, and that's from the Red Post Inn to the Hive. So we're asking you to please consider these financial requests for Peasdown St John for the residents of the year 26-27. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm sure that Mark will take those into account, and I look forward to every other ward coming along here with a wish list and a shopping list.
Just quickly, Chair, I was told once that we're the only councillors, Peasdown's only councillors who have ever submitted a statement prior to the council budget meeting.
Okay. That's probably because a lot of other councillors do it actually as part of the budget process directly, but I appreciate that that Peasdown is its own master or whatever. Cheers. Moving on to the minutes of the previous meeting. Are you happy for me to sign these as a correct record? I'm assuming that deafening silence means yes. Then we move on to agenda item 8, which is the Cabinet Member update. I can just say that agenda item 8, the update, then the medium-term financial strategy, then quarter 2 budget monitoring, and then the home to school transport finance update. There's a lot of overlap with these 4. We discussed this as panel members before the meeting, and I think if we can deal with these as a block, so that if questions are asked that are referencing one or more of these items, then that would be a sensible way to proceed. That said, passed across to you, Councillor Elliott, for your report.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm very happy to not give an extensive Cabinet Member update to the meeting, as a huge amount of what I would be saying I will say as an introduction to the NTFS and the budget monitoring report, because that's been most of my activity over the last few weeks. I think the budget setting for next year, particularly related to the NTFS, and the implications of the fair funding formula are a major part of that. As members of the panel may be aware, fair funding was consulted on over the summer, and the government published their results of the consultation and their financial plan for local councils last Thursday afternoon. That response to the fair funding formula, what can I say, threw quite a lot up in the air again. So we're working to understand what that means. But yes, that's been my main activity over the last few weeks and months, has been budget setting activity, and that's dealt with in my introductions to the reports. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, I will chip in. And I know we've had a discussion about the fair funding formula, some of the changes that are taking place, in particular the inclusion of housing costs as part of that formula allocation. I appreciate that you're still untangling the rooms at the moment as far as that goes, but also reference as well the announcement that there will be the opportunity for councils, where it's appropriate, to levy a tourism levy. That's something that has been an ambition of this council for as long as I've been on this council. But I understand that that will be a responsibility of the Metro Mayor. And I think it'll be important to first of all have a discussion with Helen to point out that this has been a long-standing policy of Baines. But the other side of a tourist levy coin is where that coin is spent, and I think it's important, as happens in other European countries, that the income from a tourism levy is used to enhance the tourist offer that cities make to visitors, and to deal with some of the impact of tourism on cities. So, just saying that as that.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just respond to that, the fair funding formula, as you say, the housing element. I don't know whether we've got Section 151 officer with us. I don't know whether you'd have any comment on whether the housing element of the fair funding formula is likely to change based on last Thursday's announcement. I don't know whether that's anything you've got any information on yet. But I will say that we've got up and down movement from all sorts of changes to the funding formula after last Thursday, and we are trying to assess where we land. You know, overall, the fair funding formula is likely to, well, it will definitely, I think, at this stage we can say, will be negative for us overall. We're trying to work out how negative. And you've got any comment on the housing bit specifically?
I think that's known as being thrown under the bus.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there was a lot of discussion in the news headlines around that particular topic area. We're still going through the detail of the formula itself and actually what it means. We can't find any direct correlation that it's giving us a financial benefit at this moment in time. and we believe that most of the benefits in this area are going towards London and the South East.
That was my...
Yeah, sorry, and to answer the second point you raised about tourist levy, obviously we, as a council, have been at the forefront of lobbying for a tourist levy. Very, very pleased to see a tourist levy being proposed. The devil will be in the detail, and as you say, the fact that it's being given as power to metro mayors rather than directly to councils obviously introduces some concern, and we need to be able to have some, well, you know, if the levy is going to be raised in Bath and North East Somerset, then we need to have some control over how it's spent in Bath and North East Somerset, and I'm sure there will be negotiations with the Westfield Mayor ongoing.
Yes, and I think the fact that there is a good working relationship with our current Metro Mayor is positive. I look forward to see how that works in other parts of the country where things are less positive.
I completely concur with that.
Yes. One element of the monitoring report and the financial strategy is, of course, the home-to-school transport. Councillor Holt, Lucy, I heard that you wanted to leave early, so did you want to do your bit first? No? In that case, I was given misinformation. I was also told that you were Paul May, but apart from that, everything's been fine. Okay.
Okay, well, we'll take it in order then of the agenda.
Yes.
Then.
Okay. Right, so if there's no questions on the initial Cabinet Member update, medium-term financial strategy, did you want to say a couple of words on that?
Yeah, so yeah, this is the 2026-27 medium-term financial strategy. It sets out our high-level financial position and what we expect it to be over the next 5 years. As I've mentioned, we've got an unprecedented level of uncertainty at the moment due to the ongoing fair funding review. I talked last year about the amount of uncertainty in the budget, and my hope that with the promises of the newly elected government we would get to some level of certainty and be able to plan for the long term, which is, after all, what the MTFS is for. Unfortunately, we are obviously not there yet. This is, if anything, a more uncertain financial environment than this time last year at the moment. As I say, the government published the response to the fair funding review last Thursday afternoon, and it changed quite a lot, more than we or anyone else were expecting, I think it's fair to say, and we're still working through the implications of that. So, as I sit here today, we still don't know the precise impact for Bath and North East Somerset. We therefore have to base the MTFS on assumptions and modelling, not confirmed figures. So, to be clear, the MTFS you have in front of you does not take into account the announcement last week, because we don't know what it means yet. So the modelling and assumptions in this report are based on the assumptions we were making before that, which were still assumptions, but they were based on the original fair funding proposal before it was adjusted last Thursday post the consultation. I say it's a pretty uncertain position. However, that said, despite the uncertainty, we have a duty to plan responsibly, so we are using the best information we've had at the time to model things. So what that is saying to us is that the projected budget gap for 2026-27 will be 8.9 million, and then gaps of 10 million in the further 2 years after that. A cumulative gap of about 38.6 million over the next 5 years, after accounting for planned savings and income generation. There's obviously a significant amount. We're estimating in this report that the reductions in central government funding will be about 13 million over the next 3 years due to fair funding. So that's 4 million in 26-27, 4 million in 27-28, 5 million in 28-29. To put it in context, just so that panel members remember, our net budget is 151.7 million. So the scale of the potential funding loss is pretty significant. The reason for that is our relative needs are assessed as lower than more deprived areas. The new funding formula assumes a council tax of over £2,000 for a Band D house, and our council tax is just over £1,800 for a Band D house, the third lowest of all the South West unitary authorities. We're providing great value for money to Bath and North East Somerset residents, but the new formula actually penalises the lower council tax. And we obviously don't have a way of bringing that up to the median because we're capped at 4.99%, unless something gets announced in the next few days, which it might. We don't know. Again, it's another level of uncertainty. And we face a redistribution of business rate income due to a proposed reset of the retained business rates. Again, that's a thing that changed last week, or the damping of that has changed last week. We still don't know the implications. There are other risks and pressures. The sustained inflation, we're predicting paying contract inflation at 3% next year. There's rising inflation in social care. The MTFS allocates nearly 20 million for demographic and contract inflation pressures in adult social care and over 6 million in children's social care over the next 5 years. And there is continued increased need in children's services, as I have been talking about for many, many months and years now. And then just to note that whilst it's off balance sheet, the dedicated school grant deficit is forecast to reach 32.8 million by the end of 24-25, with annual overspends of 10 to 12 million. So whilst that is off balance sheet, that is real money that is not being funded by central government at the moment. We await permission to rebuild the Culverhay site in order to try and minimise some of that. So, in the face of that uncertainty, we're taking a prudent and proactive approach. We are maintaining our unearmarked reserves at 12.6 million to manage unseen pressures in year. We're reviewing all capital spending to ensure affordability and in line with our strategic priorities. And most importantly and fundamentally, we are investing in transformation and prevention. That includes digital transformation, new ways of working, and early intervention in social care. So I am frustrated to be putting in front of the panel a position which is pretty uncertain. We are left planning in the dark somewhat at the moment, but we're doing everything in our power to plan responsibly despite that. We just don't have all the information that we need at the moment, and I'm happy to take questions on the MTFS.
Any questions? Duncan?
Thank you, Chair. You, I think, alluded to speculation that the government might allow councils to levy a council tax above the current cap of 4.99% without a referendum to help councils get over this period of transition because of the fair funding review. We don't know whether that's going to be the case, but can you give an indication of what raising the council tax beyond 4.9% would do to alleviate our deficit?
Every 1% on council tax is about £1.5 million. He checks with his financial officers. 1.4 million. So every percentage increase in council tax is about 1.4 million extra in revenue. So that gives you an idea of the quantum.
Following on from that, there's been rumours that the top bandings of council tax may well be extended. Has there been any modelling on how many houses in Bath and North East Somerset we have that are at the top band and what that could possibly mean? I'm not aware of any modelling we've done because we have absolutely no detail as to what that might be yet. And I am nervous that whilst central government have been floating balloons around that, they might do it but take the money off us and not allow us to keep it, which I think would be pretty damaging to the relationship of council tax to councils. So I hope I'm wrong about that, but I am nervous that they will do something with the top bands, either introduce more top bands or allow an increase in percentage above 4.99% on the top bands, but then claw that money straight back to central government, which obviously wouldn't help us at all. Yeah, we don't know. They haven't announced anything, and we have no information kind of flowing through any channels on what they're proposing. And just to say, we haven't had any discussion within Cabinet as to whether we would increase council tax above the 4.99%, were we allowed to do so. So, because we don't know we're going to have permission to do so. So even then,
we would have to have discussion around that.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Yes, Toby.
Thank you. There's going to be a body to look at pay in the social care sector and set national rates for social care. Have we factored that in in looking at the adult social care costs?
I'm not aware of any specific modelling for that around adult social care funding. Gary?
I think there is a policy, there is some funding indicated for, I think it's 28, 29 for that, so I don't think there's an immediate impact next year, so that doesn't form part of next year's budget.
I think that may not kick in until April 28, so that may be reasonable.
Yeah, so I think we'll have to react to the consultation on that.
But there has been a discussion around the fair funding formula of part of that formula increases for rural areas because of travel costs to do with social care, if I'm right in saying?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, I think the distance there doesn't, it's more of a, rather than being rural areas specifically, it's about distance, and being a relatively small authority geographically, even though we're quite rural,
okay.
I don't think that helps us particularly. Jeff, you got any comments?
No, I mean, the amounts of money that we're talking about there are very, very small in terms of financial benefit because of the way in which the formula works, and it gives a much higher degree of importance to children and adults and less so around the remoteness indicator, as it were.
So more the Scottish Isles rather than Nempnet Thruble then. Okay. Any other questions? Sure.
Hi, Mark. So I'm just trying to get my head around the areas that are contributing to this level of uncertainty. I see that the contingency scenario, we're looking at 9.87 million of savings, but potentially up to 14.37 million. So it's quite a wide area of uncertainty there. Other than the fair funding, which is obviously adding an element of uncertainty, where are the main areas that are causing that?
I mean, the uncertainty part comes mainly from the fair funding issue because we don't know what income we're going to get. There is obviously always, there is always uncertainty in predicting demand in children's and adults, and particularly in children's. When we're in a situation where a very small change in the number of children in care, I mean, like 2 or 3 children extra in care can be another £1 million on the budget if they're very high need. So there's always uncertainty around that, but the whole point of the MTFS is to try and build in reasonable assumptions about that. So we are trying to make reasonable assumptions around the things we have control over.
Okay. And do you think this assessment that you've made so far of 13 million on the fair funding over 3 years, could that be wildly out, or is that? Or we?
I don't think it'll be wildly out. I think I've been talking to officers since last Thursday. We don't know. We don't know right now. We should know by the end of the week once we've worked through all of the modelling. At least better. We won't know for definite until the middle of December when we actually get a number off the government. That's when we will find out for definite. We should have better modelling by the end of this week, based on the figures, based on the formula that the principles they announced last Thursday. I think the more likely outcome is that the distribution of that over the 3 years might move around a bit. Do I think that we're going to end up materially better off than 13 million? No, I don't. It could be worse, it could be better, but not by much.
Okay. Any other questions on the MTFS? So moving gently on to the Q2 budget monitoring.
Yeah, so This is revenue and capital budget monitoring for the first half of the 25-26 financial year. So this is the looking backwards, how did we do report. As we all know, the budget's divided between capital and revenue. I'll just briefly mention the capital budget. We are forecast to spend 106.2 million against a budget of 146.4 million, giving a variance of 40 million. Of this variance, 39.6 million is anticipated to be rephased into future years, so it's not that those things aren't happening or have been cancelled, it's just reflecting the reality of project delivery timescales and needing to align spend with actual progress on the ground with projects. Some points to note would be that the main areas of rephasing are in resources, economic, cultural, social development, built environment, sustainable development and children's services. For example, within resources, there are some delays in commercial estate refurbishments and some vehicle procurement. The procurement of the new electric recycling vehicles, for example, has slipped from March to May, so it slips from one financial year to another. There are some things like that. Children's services, the project for the small residential unit at Charlton House has been paused. So there's some rephasing of capital projects. But nothing kind of untoward or wildly unusual. Turning to the revenue budget, as always, we are seeing some very significant pressure. At the end of September, the Council is forecasting a 2.4 million overspend against the revised revenue budget, but that is after playing in this year's 9.8 million of budgeted contingency and 1.5 million from the pay and grading reserve. So that we have played in to, we put that contingency in place because we were clear that there was a lot of uncertainty in the budget. That uncertainty and risk has materialised, and we're now playing in the contingency figures. So the main areas of pressure are children's services with a forecast overspend of £6 million. This continues to be driven by high-cost residential placements for vulnerable and complex young people, increased demand, and continued reliance on agency staff to cover vacancy. I should say, though, that I am much more confident than I have previously been that we are starting to get a grip on children's services. That 6 million number is big, but it's actually smack in the middle of what they were predicting in Q1. So for the first time, I think, I'm coming back to a panel not saying that a number has gone up for children's services. It appears to be stabilising. So I am hoping we've reached an inflection point and that the news will be better again in Q3. As I say, it's tricky with children's services because it can just be a difference of a handful of children that makes a significant difference to the budget, but it does look like we're getting control of that. Adult social care is forecasting a net overspend of £1 million, with the main drivers being increased demand for residential and home care and pressures in learning disability services. Heritage services are facing a significant shortfall, primarily due to lower than projected visitor numbers at the Roman Baths and the associated retail and catering income. We were aware that we were setting some pretty punchy targets for the Roman Baths. They were based on some ambitious assumptions around international markets, particularly in China and Southeast Asia coming back, that have not materialised. Having said that, the team are doing a fantastic effort on, and the income per head is very, very good and going up. It's just that the numbers haven't come back up to where we were predicting. There's pressures in the commercial estate around rental income shortfalls, as well as in waste and fleet around staffing costs. They're partially offset, what else do I want to pick out? I should mention that we've got a pretty good track record on delivering the planned savings. Of the 14 million savings in the 25-26 budget, 9.15 million are forecast to be achieved at the end of September. In summary, I think the capital programme looks kind of reasonably on track, with some variances due to rephasing, but not significant overspend, so that's good. Revenue budget continues to be under significant pressure, particularly in children's social care and in the income-generating areas around heritage and the Roman Baths. We're developing mitigation plans with directors to bring the budget back in line. I would say that for comparison, at this point last year, at the same meeting last year, I was reporting an overspend of 5 million. So we are in a much better position than we were this time last year. But it's clear that the underlying pressures, especially in statutory services, are going to continue to be a challenge. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Duncan, then Sean.
Thank you. In the revenue monitoring commentary and the spreadsheets, there's lots of reference to staffing underspends or vacancies or gaps, and it's actually being proposed as a way of managing overspending on those budget lines. That's not a healthy situation, because if there are shortages in staffing, it means the existing staffing have got to do probably too much work, and they get overworked and stressed and so on. It might mean that what we provide as services aren't as good as they could be. So is there anything particular about our situation in Bath and North East Somerset that's producing these difficulties managing recruitment, or are we just experiencing what everybody's experiencing across the country?
I mean, I don't think we're experiencing anything unusual, certainly for this region. I mean, recruitment tends to be a regional thing rather than a national thing from a sort of ability to recruit and retain point of view. But I think we also, I would point towards the fact that we do have the Being Our Best programme, Smarter Structures work to do, and we have not done that. Or not done a lot of that yet. That programme is due to kick in over the next couple of years. And as part of that, we should be looking at what the correct structure is for all of the teams in the council. And vacancy management has been an ongoing tool that we've used for managing budget pressure over the last few years, but we aren't this year in a situation like we were for the previous 2 years of kind of slamming on the brakes hard halfway through the year. So I think reasonable vacancy management is a perfectly reasonable financial tool, I think. I don't know if anybody's got any comment on vacancy management.
No, I mean, all I would add is that there is nothing from the conversations that I've been involved that would flag up a significant risk in terms of staff vacancies at the moment. Staff vacancies are quite normal. It's what happens. You get staff turnover all the time. There's nothing that's out of any kind of tolerance level that I would comment on at this moment.
Thank you. Sean.
Thanks. Mark, I was just wondering, on the rephasing, some of the items I can see clearly where, and it's a marginal, the rephasing, like you say, it's moving into a new financial year. I can't see with the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone infrastructure, it's just going into the future. Do we have any idea how far that project's being pushed out?
I wouldn't want to comment on specifics for that project. I'd want Councillor Roper in the room for that. Obviously, that's in his portfolio. I know that there have been, that's a project that we are pushing forward quite hard now. It's obviously been kicking around as a proposal for 10 years or more. I think, it is a key priority of the administration to get the Somer Valley Enterprise Zone built. So I know that my colleague Councillor Roper is that's a significant part of his workload, and as I can't comment directly. I'm happy to get some numbers to you afterwards if you'd like. But I think, I don't think any of that rephasing is anything too alarming. But I know that there's been delays, for example, in purchasing land and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And on the issues to do with the Roman baths and the corporate estate income, both below budget, we're struggling to fill Bath Quays South offices, there's shortfall in the numbers, the attendance numbers for Rowan Baths. Are we we're literally just being over optimistic in a budget, and we shouldn't have been?
Yes, and it's one of the reasons why we put the contingency in there, is because we thought the numbers were possibly a bit punchy for the Roman Baths. So we I think, well, I say, we'll wait and see what we produce for the budget, but I think that we will probably be producing a more realistic number for the Roman Baths for the budget for next year.
Right, okay. And, I mean, with the issue of not being able to fill offices and the problems with the corporate estate, commercial estate, have we got any initiatives to try? Are we just hoping that people are going to turn up?
Oh, absolutely not. No, I mean, and let's not mix corporate and commercial estate. So
yeah.
the Bath Quays is corporate estate, so it's not directly in my portfolio, but I know that Councillor Roper is working very hard to, in fact, yes, no, I am sure that there will be some reasonable news about that, but I can speak directly to the commercial estates. We do have problems with refurbishment still, and we've taken some in-house surveyors on to try and get the surveying work done, because there was a bottleneck with getting the work done to refurb commercial estate properties, and that hasn't moved as quickly as I would like. But we've got some extra staff in now, because it's better to get the extra staff in and get those things back on the market.
Right. And was there some delays with the Jollies?
Jollies is looking pretty good, actually. The opening date now, I mean, I think they're looking at sort of summer rather than late spring, but they're not, you know, I mean, that is a huge job. Councillor Roper and I went up on the roof of Jollies a couple of weeks ago, and it's a mind-blowing task, that roof, because it's not a roof, it's 40 roofs, completely separate, higgledy-piggledy, you know, towers sticking up in the middle of them, and it's all listed, so you have to put it back exactly as it was. You're not allowed to change anything. It's a very tricky project, and I'm very comfortable with the progress we're making, and I think it will be delivered in time for Morley's to be able to move in fit, and certainly have it up and running in time to hit the autumn season.
Thank you. Jess.
Thank you. So, firstly, I wanted to say that I found the report really comprehensive, and as you said, it's encouraging that we're in a better place this year compared to last year, albeit the wider bleak pressures on the council. My specific point is, or question is similar to the one that Duncan made about what we do where particular service areas are starting to look like they're going over their revenue budget. And my particular interest is in the Parks team, which I know has been very stretched for the last few years, and where we've unfortunately had to make some staff changes. And I noted that they've got an overspend this year, forecast already due to some particular issues, and it suggests vacancy management as a way to manage those pressures. So my question is really, what's the process to agree and challenge the recovery plan for services like that? And my particular concern is that I feel that team is already very stretched in terms of officer capacity as it is, and I feel that any further vacancy management could have disproportionate impacts in terms of actually being able to deliver projects. And linked to that, I think you can potentially see that reflected already in the capital side, where there's a need to rephase the parks improvements projects significantly into next year.
Thank you. I mean, I don't have any detailed knowledge of the specific vacancies in parks. I'm very happy to take those comments back, though, and feed in particularly the whether there is any link between the vacancies and the ability to deliver the capital project. I'm happy to ask the question and receive that.
Thank you.
Any other? Sean.
So while we're on the subject of staff, I just have to mention Bob. where are we? I mean, obviously it's not following the projected routes of, I think it was supposed to be a £4.5 million cost saving by this financial year. And I think the report says it's managed about £500,000 of that. What's the plan to get that back on track? Or will it not get back on track?
I mean, the rework of the pay and grading, I think it's fair to say that I'm happy to. Sorry, I'll take a step back. The whole point of the Being Our Best exercise in the first place was not necessarily to drive huge amounts of savings, particularly on the better jobs stream, where we were looking at pay and grading. Because of issues of retention and things like that, we want to make sure that we're paying the right level for the right jobs. So the fact that we have regraded the number of jobs upwards and that we are paying council staff more, I think is a good thing, and I'm happy to stand behind that. It presents a budget problem when we were predicting a particular amount and we're not going to hit it. I don't know whether there are any comments that officers want to make about kind of the ongoing, like say, we've realised £500,000 so far. I don't know what we're projecting to realise over the longer term. Gary, have you got any figures on that, or Jeff?
The original target from the restructuring was about 4.5 million. I think this is due to timing more than anything, so the target is still broadly to reach that, but it's shifted to the right a bit. So I think by the end of 26-27, the plan is to have made virtually all of that 4.5.
But I say that you've got to remember that you've got two strands to Bob. You've got the pay, you've got the pay and reward bit, and then you've got the structural bit. And it's the structural bit that we haven't really got that far into yet.
Oh, no, I mean, the principle of what we're trying to achieve from it, other than cost savings, I think was very good. It's just that number was put out there, and it just raises questions of how that number was established in the first place, and do we really have a good handle on where we are if we're so far out?
And we do have a new chief executive coming in, and by definition, new chief executives have their own views when it comes to structure and organisation. Just putting that out there. Malcolm.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and things from me. First one is a more general version of Sean's question, really. In terms of that capital expenditure, and we're 40.2 million being rephased into other years, what impact does that have on revenue for us this year, either in savings we're expecting to make and can't, or costs, ongoing running costs which we were expecting to incur and now won't be? And my second question is more of a detailed one back on page 71 of the reports and things. I just had struggled with some of the figures. It's mostly in that adult services section and things there. But there's lines such as the top one for leisure, which said we were budgeted for 302,000. We've already spent 1.3 million, but we're still forecasting 302,000. And there's a couple of other examples, but there's also a big one, 2/3 of the way down for public health, where we budgeted 0. It looks like we've saved 3.74 million, and yet we're still forecasting 0. And I couldn't tally those up, and they seemed quite significant figures. Sure.
I'll ask, whilst I'm answering the first question, I'll ask if the officers can have a look at that page 71
well, I do that.
and have a look at those specific lines. On your first point around the effect that the capital programme has on the revenue, I mean, there isn't one answer to that, because delay of a capital programme that is designed for example, something like Culverhay. I mean, that is one of the rebuilding of the rebuilding of the 2 new schools on the Culverhay site is capital expenditure that will save us large amounts of revenue spend. So that delay definitely does have an effect on our revenue. Although again, it's part of the school's budget, so it's in the off-balance sheet revenue part of the revenue. It's in the send area. So you know, trying to read back a direct relationship from the capital budget into the revenue budget is hard. Sure, if we're able to delay borrowing, then that reduces our revenue spend in year. But the job of Treasury Management, this good man behind me, does a fantastic job of making sure that we're not borrowing money where we don't need to. So, you know, I mean, if you look at our borrowing over the first 6 months of the year, I don't think we've taken out any new long-term borrowing in the last 6 months, have we, Gary?
It's mainly been
refinancing, yeah. So with the capital programme ongoing, even though some of that is allocated to corporate supported borrowing, we're not going to go out and do the borrowing if we can borrow from ourselves internally, you know. It's difficult to make a direct read from the capital budget into the revenue budget, is I guess what I'm saying, and there will be movements both plus and negative, both positive and negative, depending on what the project is that's being delayed and how the spending was being financed. Because I mean, a huge amount of the capital project, the capital budget, for example, is financed through grant funding or through WECA or through, so that has no effect on our revenue budget at all, unless it is something that would have benefited the revenue budget by allowing us to provide a service more cheaply. Did you have an answer on that spreadsheet question?
I didn't get all of the lines, but I think I was looking at the leisure line, so I think we'd have to take some of the detail away. I think it's primarily to do with the fact that they haven't yet done the recharge to potentially to capital, so that's why the forecast looks a bit odd. So if you take that, the leisure one, the budget was 300, the forecast is 300, but we spent 1 point something. It's simply because they haven't done the environment yet, in terms of some of that may be fired into capital. So that's what we think is the explanation, but we'd have to take away the kind of detail of that.
And I assume that the public health line is the grant?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Any other questions on the monitoring report? If not, just chip in myself. It's good to hear that you're feeling more confident when it comes to children's services. Can I assume that, well, I hope I can assume, as we're talking about a relatively small number of children, the predictive model of where that's going to be in a year 2, 5, 10 should mean that you can track those individuals through the system and our costs. Is that now, are you comfortable that that's in place? Because I wasn't confident it has been in the past.
Yeah, in fact, I was in a meeting this afternoon before this one, where I was looking at some reporting that was giving exactly that kind of information. I mean, obviously, without completely anonymised. I mean, there's no need for me to know anything about the individual children, but it was tracking individual cases and saying, you know, we were expecting to step down the packages for these children or reunify these children with their families. This is what we've achieved. This is exactly where we've got to. It was yes, it gave me confidence that we are on top of it.
Thank you. Then moving on from the Q2 budget monitoring report to home to school transport. Lucy.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you for asking us to report back to you today on the Council's home to school transport service. I have with me here to respond to your questions. I've got Paul Garrett, Head of Highways. I'm just wondering if I have anyone from Children's Services. I don't think so, no. Okay, lovely. I'd like to thank Paul for pulling together what I hope you'll feel is a comprehensive report outlining the complex challenges faced by this service and the work being done to contain expenditure. I should flag up that there has been a number of changes to the service's organisational structure in the past year. The service moved into the Highways Directorate in 24-25. We have an interim exec director from June picking up the baton from Mandy Bishop's work in this area, a new head of highways in Paul, and a new cabinet member. So please bear with us if we need to get back to you on any of the points you raised. I'd like to provide some context and touch on the logistics, the budget, and our monitoring of efficiency measures in this service. As I'm sure you're aware, we have a statutory responsibility to support eligible children accessing education, and the eligibility criteria, which are set out under the 1996 Education Act, are based on distance from school, unsafe routes, low-income families, and children that cannot be reasonably expected to walk to school due to SEND or mobility issues. Logistical challenges for the team, which has only recently increased from 8 to 11 members of staff, are significant. Around 2,700 children are transported to school every single day, morning and evening. The majority of these are actually children attending mainstream schools, about 70%, but around 800 children are those with SEND, special educational needs or disabilities, or requiring alternative provision, or the hospital education reintegration service. Around 325 vehicle journeys coordinated every day, in minibuses, coaches, taxis, and this year, for the first time, the council's own cars. And we maintain 21 vehicles based at Locksbrook Depot, including 13 wheelchair-adapted minibuses. Finally, a staggering 700 new contracts were agreed for this year, up from around 500 last year, which arise from new children joining the service, or those moving house, or those moving school, all requiring personalised travel arrangements. Whilst the numbers of children attending mainstream schools remain relatively constant, it's those with EHCPs, education, health and care plans, that have increased dramatically, consistent with the national trend. About 50% of children with EHCPs then require home-to-school transport. The problem for Baines is that our local SEND provision is full, and we have plans to address this, which we will hear more about. But it is these out-of-county transfers that drive our costs. Finally, budget-wise, since around 2023, post-COVID, the budget has been increased annually from about 6.5 million to 11.4 million this year. Despite this rebasing, costs exceed this location by around 1 to 1.5 million annually. What I'd like to stress here is that our growth in costs of around 20% each year aligns with the average 20% figure reported nationally by the Local Government Association. So we're not alone in this challenging environment, and in many areas are performing well. The focus, nevertheless, has been on efficiency savings, and you will hear more about the measures which we have put in place, including our tackling the use of single occupancy taxis for out-of-county SEND placements. There is good news. I'm pleased to report that at Q2 this year, we are forecasting a much better position outturn than at the same point last year. We are on track to be on budget, with only a very slight variance of about £20,000. In summary, this is a dedicated, experienced team working long hours to provide a logistically challenging service, responding to a national increase in EHCP numbers, which is out with the Council's control, for which we receive no extra funding. I'm sure we'll all agree that the delayed Schools White Paper on SEND provision cannot come fast enough. With these thoughts, I hand over to Paul for his presentation of more details.
Right, I just have some slides I'll share on the screen. Okay. Okay, thank you. Right, so as Councillor Hodge mentioned, this is a statutory service that the council has to provide, and I won't go through the criteria there, but there are a few categories where children would qualify for home-to-school transport, and we don't automatically go to providing any contracted services if a child is eligible to get free transport. What we'll look at first of all is whether we could offer a personal travel budget. Is there any local public transport where we could provide a bus pass for? And then if that isn't possible, because of course there aren't always bus routes in the places that we need them for taking children to school, we'll then look at our in-house vehicles. We have 13 minibuses, we've now got 7 cars, and then last resort is going into contracted transport, so either that's large coaches, minibuses, and the very last resort is taxis. So just to set the national context, just touching upon what Councillor Hodge mentioned there, it has got a lot of national attention just because it is having such an impact on council budgets across the UK. So the Local Government Association did some research recently and identified that over the last decade, the spend on home-to-school transport has increased by a staggering 1.23 billion. It's a huge amount. And just the last month in October, the National Audit Office has produced a report on home-to-school transport. And this reflects our own local experience, where the particular pressure is the increase in demand on providing transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities. So between 2015 and 2015-16 and 2023-24, what the National Audit Office found is that the rise in spend on transport was a 106% increase for providing transport for children with SEND compared to mainstream school transport. So that's partly driven by those children who qualify for education, health and care plans. And so you can see there that the increase between 2015 and 2025 is 166% in EHCPs. So just because a child has an EHCP doesn't mean they automatically qualify for free transport, but there is a correlation there. And it's that transport which is more expensive. So it costs about 5 times more to transport a child with special educational needs or disabilities to school compared to providing transport for mainstream children. So going back to Baines and our local pressure here with home-to-school transport, that graph on the screen there just shows the rise in EHCPs in our area over the last 10 years. So that does continue to grow. And many of the children with special educational needs and disabilities are educated in schools outside of the district. And so, of course, if they're not local schools, then it's going to be longer journeys, and that's why that transport costs more. And we're not taking large numbers of children to these schools. It's lots of small individual journeys. So it's not the sort of thing we can put a big 53-seat coach on to take children to these schools. And that's where the use of taxis has come in. So as I mentioned earlier, taxis are a last resort, but in some cases that is what we have to do to provide that statutory service. And particularly in rural areas, if you've got children living outside of the urban areas, when we go out to tender for this transport, in some places there isn't a lot of competition, and in some cases we go out to tender and we might get a bid just from one company. So that affects the price. And then quite a few children with special educational needs and disabilities, they may need a passenger assistant to assist them on the journey. So there's an additional cost with that. So because these costs have been increasing for a number of years, last year we commissioned an independent review using some specialist consultants just to have a look really whether Baines were doing the right things. How we compared to other authorities in terms of our spend and the operation of the service. So the good news is that we are doing things well compared to many other authorities and on many measurements. So for example, on the contracted transport that we do provide, we're getting good rates, good value for money. We also have a much lower usage of passenger assistance compared to many other authorities, which means that we were quite robust in assessing the need for those. And also our internal fleet, as you would hope to expect, does operate at a lower cost than if we go for contracted transport. A couple of areas they did identify. We do have a high level of taking children outside of the district to school, and that relates to those children with descent needs. And the cost of taxis is high, and that again relates to the lack of competition in some areas and the rural routes. So we have been taking a number of steps to try and make the service as efficient as possible and to try and keep control of those costs. So a few years ago, the service was provided really split between two services, between education and the passenger transport team. So it's now a single combined team. The budget used to be held in the education team, and that's been moved across to the team that's actually providing the service, again, to get better control. And there's been various system improvements, admin improvements, just to free up staff time and make sure that staff are concentrating on finding the most efficient way to get children to school and the most cost-effective way to do it. And part of that's including a business lead post, which really focuses on scrutinising those different modes of transport and the routes to get children to school. And this year, for the first time, we've introduced our own council-owned cars and employed drivers to try and remove some of those taxi routes, which we can do at lower cost. So further things we're looking at, trying to get further cars that we can run in-house and more drivers. There will be a limit to how much we can do in-house, because there comes a point where if we're employing drivers full-time to drive these cars, we need to find work for them to do during the day. With the drivers we've got so far, we can do that. There's other tasks they can do with some children who say only are in education up to lunchtime. But we're going to need to start looking at part-time drivers, which will probably be a bit more difficult to attract to the role. Our council fleet of minibuses, some of those have reached the end of their serviceable life. So when we're replacing those, we're bringing in slightly larger buses with more seats to increase our in-house capacity. And something that we believe is a first across the country, colleagues in the education service, they're looking at whether a mentor service could be used to provide transport as part of a wider mentoring service for some of the SEND children. And that might actually reduce transport costs, because it could reduce the need for passenger assistance with some of those journeys. And some of the other specialist school providers for the council were also looking at whether they could perhaps provide transport. What will make the big difference, though, the bigger difference, is if we can have more special educational need provision within the district or close to it. And the council's SEND capital and sufficiency work stream is actually looking at that, and that's the focus, to really try and provide more of those places locally, and that will then cut down on transport costs for quite a few children. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Sure.
Thank you. I mean, firstly, guys, I mean, it's nice to see a report where there's such a lot of proactive steps being taken. So that really does come across in the report. I just wanted to clarify some numbers, if I may. So, in terms of out of area, do we have a rough number on how many journeys we're going out of area each day?
Coming back, we do have a bit of a problem with the liquid logic reporting system that's used by children's services. The home to school transport element is just sort of a bit of a bolt-on to that. So getting the data is being pretty difficult, and that's why also this was put in manually, and we're developing a better system, but it all has to be tracked down from invoices and things. So,
okay.
Yeah, that's something I don't have the information right now, but I can provide.
Okay. I'm just intrigued, because when I look at the map in the reports, it looks like we're going out as far as sort of Stratford-upon-Avon sort of area. And we can't find a single place in our entire region that could accommodate that rather than going all the way out to Stratford upon Avon?
I'll just take it first and then hand over to Paul, but shame we don't have someone from Children's Services, but I did ask that inquiry and make that inquiry, as well as the number of schools actually that out of area. But I think it's really the detail that has gone into placing children into the best school for them, and that was the response we received, that it's not straightforward, and finding the schools that have the best provision is what the service is aimed at, and that's why we have such a wide scatter.
May I ask one more question? I just wanted to clarify something on the graph, if that was okay. So on the graph that you've shown, I'm just trying to get an idea of where we're going, what the trajectory is. I mean, the graph, I wouldn't say it's misleading, but of course it starts at 2015, and I think ECHP started around that time, didn't they? So it's starting from a low base number in terms of qualifying for this service. So so we're seeing a sort of a consistent line going up at about 200 a year. Do we think that's going to level out, or is difficult to predict?
It is difficult to predict, and it will partly depend on what the government announces in its white paper that they've delayed, so which is coming out after Christmas, if it's going to change really anything in relation to EHCPs. So we just don't know really is the answer to that.
Okay. All right.
I mean, in terms of the budget trajectory, I mean, I think it's a straight line, and there's two factors really. Yes, the government report, but also that big factor of whether we can deliver in-house. If you're talking about the expenditure in relation to the trajectory, you know, if we can put those places in locally, which is our aim, then although it's slightly stalled at the moment, that is our aim, to offer those places, and then we should see that curve levelling, you know, our costs hopefully levelling off. Yeah.
It's another point where Culverhay matters. That's a 120-place STEM school we're trying to build at Culverhay. Is one of the two schools, and if we can get 120 places back in area, right in Bath, would be fantastic.
Absolutely, and that was one of the proactive points in the report. Absolutely.
Malcolm, then Toby.
Thank you. Well, I think that 1.5 of my questions has been answered. It's, the second half of one of those was, do we understand what sort of saving Culverhay and Charlton House would make to our home to school transport budget? And if I can link up with another question and things there as well, how much difference would a better bus service across Baines make in terms of this, in terms of people which we could push to buses, were there buses on those sort of routes?
In terms of the impact Culverhay would have, I don't have that answer right now, but I can look at it and see if we can give an estimate on that. Bus routes, difficult to quantify. I think that the lack of good rural bus services in particular probably only has a marginal impact at the moment on the cost of home to school transport. We know there's a few routes where timetables have changed that don't coincide with school times anymore. It has had some impact, but I suppose of the total cost of home to school transport, it's probably making a marginal difference at the moment.
I'd just like to add to that. I think it is a source of frustration that we should be able to soon produce those figures, you know, to know exactly what proportion are costing the extra and how much those extra places will. And I think if you ask us back, I hope in 6 months, 8 months, we will have a better dashboard and have that information a bit more to hand, so we can predict the savings and where the budget's going to go.
Thank you. Toby, then Jess.
Thank you. Firstly, on the point that Sean raised about the steeper part of that graph, that's up to 2018, the previous statements were being replaced by EHCPs. So I think we can really read that graph from 2018. The previous part is an artifact, as it were. My question, though, is about your services involvement in appeals. Because quite a lot of these out-of-area placements will be the result of an appeal by parents to tribunal asking for a particular provision rather than the provision originally suggested. And I wondered whether you provide an estimate to the team defending our decision at tribunal of the transport cost of that to be factored into the additional cost that the tribunal's got to weigh up against the benefits.
We have relatively few that do go to appeal, surprisingly. I mean, there's an internal stage of appeal anyway that we deal with. Cost is a factor, but it really is about the eligibility, really, if that child needs it. So the cost, although it's important, and that's why we're talking about it today, the factor with an appeal is really whether the child meets the criteria.
Sorry, the internal...
Yeah, sorry, okay. So, yeah, just to say again, so we receive relatively few appeals, but when we do have an appeal, the main factor that is considered on is any grey areas, really, as to whether the child meets the criteria or not. So cost is really a secondary issue. It's not a deciding factor.
I should make clear, the appeal I'm talking about is the appeal to the SEND tribunal against, about the provision being made by the authority for that child, not the sort of appeal about eligibility for school transport. This is about the eligibility, about the provision to be made in the statement, and whether you provide a cost input to the statement for our team to use at the SEND tribunal.
I don't believe we do give a cost input to that. I don't believe we've been requested.
I think, perhaps that's something Children's Services ought routinely to ask for any case going to tribunal. What are the transport cost implications?
Jess.
Thank you. And yeah, thank you also for the really detailed report. It's very encouraging to see the kind of focus on this area. I wanted to ask about the use of council-owned cars, and instinctively that feels like the right thing to do to reduce the number of single occupancy taxis. I guess what I was interested in is, I saw in the report that there was a kind of qualifier that when staff are sick, or the people accompanying the children are unable to come in, then you need to use agencies, and so that creates additional costs. And so I wondered overall, how far is the use of council-owned cars proving a cost saving? And have we got the right number of cars? Could we get any more, or are we at the right level?
Yeah, if we have a passenger assistant, a guide escort off 6, we would have to use an agency. So that obviously that's a big cost, and we want to avoid that where we can. The use of the council vehicles will begin to make a difference. We're already seeing a saving this year. It has started this year. So yeah, the first vehicles started coming into use earlier on this year, sort of January, February time, and we've been building up the numbers since. And we're being quite frugal. We're not buying brand new vehicles. We're using second-hand cars. Not just any old car. Obviously they're good. They're a good standard. But we're being careful with the money. It's quite easy to buy the cars. It's getting the drivers, and it has to be the right sort of person to do that job. Obviously they're working with some vulnerable children here. So the limiting factor is going to be recruiting the drivers, really. And I think, like I mentioned, although lots of people want just a part-time job, the sort of start and end of a school day, the bit of time you've got in between isn't that long really once you've done journey. It's like we've always had, we continue to struggle to recruit school crossing patrols because they're not great hours to work. So we need to think of different ideas to try and fill those driver roles.
Just to bat in there, is there a link to Dial-A-Ride? Could some of those people be involved in that service?
So we already provide the Dial-A-Ride service in Bath. So the drivers, the buses that do the school run are the same buses that do the Dial-A-Ride. So yeah, so we already fill that. So that's what makes the in-house minibus service very cost effective, because those buses aren't just sitting around. And it's why there's a limit really to like how many buses we can have. So we don't own 53-seater coaches because we just couldn't make that work financially. So, but yeah, so we try and make it work like a business. It's got to pay for its costs, because if we got vehicles and people sitting around during the day, then it's actually cheaper to use a contracted service.
Any other questions? If not, then my turn. Yeah, thank you for the report. And our Baines' experience of increased costs doesn't appear to be a great deal different to anywhere else in the country. And interestingly, I think it's important when we talked about home to school transport that we separate out mainstream, geographic from SEND. I'm sure everyone's had a look at the LGA's report on the future of home to school transport that came out in June. It very clearly identifies there that the increased cost over the last few years of mainstream transport has been largely in line with inflation, but it is SEND that is exponentially rising. And I think the point's been made by a couple of people that, and certainly I've heard from LGA meetings that I've attended, that the number of councils that are moving to an in-house model is increasing, and partly because of the size of the budgets. It just makes it essential. The point that Jess made and your answer about the difficulty of recruiting drivers for particular points, I guess coordinating with Dial-A-Ride, coordinating with home to hospital transport, surely there's a social enterprise or a CIC model that can incorporate all this kind of social transport, for want of a better way of putting it. And of course we can extend the issue of in-house services, because Culverhay is part of that. It's globally, I think most councils, apart from possibly Lancashire, are looking to increase their in-house provisions on transport and residential. I understand Lancashire are trying to divest themselves of those. Did have a question though about, and it's following on Toby's question about the appeal system and grey areas. I would agree with Toby's point that the financial cost as part of the SEND appeals system, we should almost be including that as a given, because it is a sign of it is an increased cost. I think the LGA say that SEND transport costs 3 times more for an SEND child than it does for mainstream. But I'm trying to put this carefully. The professional views of what's appropriate education and what's the appropriate transport to education quite often will differ from the parental view, who will transport being a good example. If the professional view is actually being picked up by a minibus, parental view is, no, we want a door-to-door taxi. How do we deal with that in the internal review system rather than the appeal system, to make sure, and how often does that happen? Do we have any numbers for that? And have Baines contributed to the national debate, to ministers and the LGA about what is a preferred model of providing transport for these, particularly these vulnerable young people?
Yeah, thank you, Councillors, for raising those questions. I think quite that type of auditing, the reasons that are coming forward and what we actually end up providing, I think that's something we're hoping with the information that we will have coming forward, we can look into in more detail. I think it's an interesting question. It's a sensitive question, but it's something we need to be able to answer what we feel might be appropriate and then what we end up needing to provide. So I think that is something for the future, and I'd certainly like to have a handle on those figures. And sorry, the second question you asked, it's just gone out of my head.
There was about...
Oh, whether we're contributing nationally. Yes, that's right. So not sure. Yes, would you like to answer that, Paul?
Yeah, we do contribute nationally, and we do. So, for example, ADEPT, which is the directors group for, I can't remember what ADEPT stands for now, Directors of Economy, Transport and Planning, something like that. But so with the ADEPT review of home to school transport, we're a very active participant in that. And we help to shape their guidance that they've issued to local authorities. And we've also got, so our team manager for home to school transport is also on the committee for a local authority officer group on passenger transport. So we're very much at the forefront of the discussions nationally, and being part of that, if we learn of any innovations at other councils, we can bring that to us to if there's something we haven't thought of, we can bring in best practice from other places. But what we're finding is that we tend to be suggesting things that other councils are taking on board, looking at us as doing it well.
It's just interesting that a couple of us were involved last week with the recruitment for the new chief executive, and at least one of the candidates had got experience of actually bringing homeschool transport budgets under control. Can I as well, and this is for my information, I guess, my understanding is that if you have, and this is in terms of providing residential care for youngsters with a profound disability, that if a family was to move, the responsibility stays with the home authority. I think I'm right in saying that. So if you had a family move from one to the other, isn't that the same when a family moves and it sounded like those additional transport costs actually come to the new authority remaining with the home authority?
I'm not sure on that.
I think it would depend on what the EHCP says for the particular child. Since they've moved, where they change schools, or are they still with the original school in the original authority?
Right. I suppose the overlap on that is residential schools. Okay. I'll follow that. I'll follow that up.
Yeah, we'll look into that further.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, and looking at the time, thank you for that, Mark. Although you're still here for the next two items as well. Thank you, Lucy. So the council tax reduction scheme. An update on where the scheme is, please.
Yeah, sure. And this is a specific item on the requested by the committee on the impact of the migration out of employment support allowance to universal credit and the entitlement to local council tax support that provides. So under the current local council tax support scheme, residents on income-related employment support allowance are entitled to full council tax support, and residents on universal credit receive a percentage reduction based on their weekly income in income bands. So as ESA recipients are migrated to universal credit, some are having a reduction in their support of council tax, and so this is what this report sets out. I won't go through it in detail, but there are some percentages around where we've got a sample cohort of 564 cases, all of whom were receiving 100% support. After the move to universal credit, the median is then they receive 60% support. 47% of the group that we sampled now receive 60% support. There are a small cohort that no longer receive support at all. 21 of those had savings capital above the £6,000 limit, and 46 had income that was above the £627.53 a week, which is the qualifying threshold to get any support at all. Across all of the bands where people have moved, they are actually up to date with their council tax. The majority of them are up to date with their council tax. So, and those who lost all support were more likely to be up to date. So, there's an indication there of ability to pay, I think. We have support mechanisms for those that are struggling, so anybody who moves to the new scheme who is struggling to pay can apply for discretionary support from the welfare support system. There was a targeted mail shot to all the affected households explaining the changes, and we continue to monitor what's happening with the scheme. We are not proposing any immediate changes to the scheme. Yeah, you've got the report. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Toby?
Well,
sorry, I meant to check with Damien whether I've missed anything. Sorry. We do have an officer in the room who is an expert on this, so it's worth checking whether I've missed anything.
No.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for Damien and Mark for your work on this. I mean, it's something which I've been picking up through my work as a volunteer with Citizens' Advice. They've been flagging this up as a potential issue, which is why I brought it forward and pressed for it to come to this meeting, because I thought we would have been just in time to do anything on a policy basis. But I think I'm persuaded that A, we haven't got time, B, it would cost too much money, and C, it would raise any questions about preserving the rights, would raise difficult questions about equity between those currently on LCWRA in universal credit and those on migrating from ESA. So I think it's a well-argued paper. It provides evidence for the fact that we really have got to stick with this. This is, I think, the government having mandated the migration from ESA to universal credit must have been aware that there would be implications for council tax reduction schemes across the country. Ours is by no means untypical, I think, of such schemes, and I think that the paper provides a good case that this is really one where at a policy level we have to grin and bear it, and that this will bear down on a cohort of people, particularly those who don't have savings, who are in the middle band. But I can't see that there's any option but to take the policy choices that the leadership have.
Thank you. Toby, if you want to switch your microphone off.
Sorry?
Microphone off. Thank you. If there are no other questions... Oh, sorry, Sean.
Thank you. So I'm surprised that this capital figure of 6,000 is so low. I mean, to a lot of families, particularly some of those that are, we know are inappropriately housed, £6,000 is 3 months, 4 months rent. So it's not by today's standard, it's not a huge amount of capital for any family to hold. And this is penalising financial prudence, which is quite ridiculous. I guess my question is, I'm looking at I'm not sure how to read any of the graphs. I'm not sure if they tell us much at all, really. But whether we could look at it in terms of what percentage this is of the household's total income, whether that would give us a clearer picture of what was going on.
I'm not sure I understand what the question is at the moment.
So the graphs are based. The graphs I can see here are based on the percentage of reduction that they've seen.
The chart. Are you talking about 3.3?
3.3 and 3.6.
Yeah. So 3.3 is so all of that cohort were receiving 100% relief. This graph shows what they are now receiving, and what percentage of the cohort are receiving 100%, 85%, 60%, 40%, 20%, and 0%.
That would be around about £300 per week. Would fall into, it depends. If you have 2 children, it would be £400, or 1 child, it would be £350. Typically, the eligible council tax for, say, a Band D property would work out at about £25 to £30 per week. So, a single person, about 10% of their weekly income.
Thank you. Thank you for the report, and actually I found the table was really helpful. In terms of, and my question just comes around how we deal with those arrears for people who are receiving this reduction, and whether they're still pursued for those, or whether we have a policy there which means that we mitigate how much of that we're coming after until they're in a position where they're better able to go and pay it.
Table 3.6. So the historic arrears, primarily we would look to recover those debts via an attachment to universal credit. So a reduction, weekly reduction in their, or monthly reduction in their universal credit entitlement. Obviously, that does take quite a long time to recover, but we certainly wouldn't be looking to send these cases to enforcement agents. That would be absolutely a last resort. And with households who are in this position, typically they wouldn't have many assets. It wouldn't be, as a business decision, it wouldn't make sense to do that. Families can also approach the welfare support team for discretionary write-offs in that situation, or access to the funding through the Household Support Fund, which is likely to be extended over the next 3 years, although it will be called something slightly different.
Thank you. Thank you for that report. Moving on to Parish Council election and by-election recharges. Thank you for being so patient, Aurora. To come to this, can I probably note an interest in the clerk for 2 small parish councils?
I'll do a quick introduction again, and then Aurora can pick up if I missed anything. So the purpose of this is to introduce the recharges to parish and town councils in Baines for the costs incurred in running elections and by-elections. So at present, the council covers the full cost of scheduled parish and town council elections, and 50% of the cost of the first by-election between scheduled elections, and 100% of the cost for any additional by-elections between scheduled elections. So from what we're proposing is that from April 26, parish and town councils will be recharged for the full cost of their elections and by-elections. That aligns us with the neighbouring authorities, North Somerset, South Gloss. The rationale is that the cost of running elections has more than doubled in the last 13 years due to legislative changes, voter ID, accessibility, increased printing costs, postage costs, higher polling station fees. Without the recharge policy, all Baines Council taxpayers are subsidising the cost of parish elections, even when they don't live in the parish, and that by charging the parishes, they are able to then fund their election fees through their precept to their local residents. The proposal is that each parish will be charged a flat fee of £100 for administration, plus the full cost of any contested elections, the printing, the postage, the staff, the venue hire, with shared costs for elements in common to both parish and council elections, and that by-elections will get a flat fee of £50 for administration, plus the full cost if contested. Costs will vary parish by parish, depending on electorate size, number of polling stations, turnout. Financial impact, it's estimated to save the council, to be a saving to Baines Council of about £40,000 at the next scheduled elections in May 27. Yeah, have I missed anything, Aurora?
Nothing to add.
Okay.
Any questions before Sean?
So we're now going to pay for our own elections out in North East Somerset. So how are you financing the elections in Bath?
There aren't parish elections in Bath.
I think that might be my point.
No, but there aren't parish elections.
No, but there are elections.
Well, there are elections. There are elections. The equivalent would be the Charter Trustees elections, and I believe they are recharged for their elections. I believe that's correct. I don't know. I can check. Okay. If they're not, we certainly should recharge the Charter Trustees for their election. Oh, they're not elected. Of course, they're not. No, okay. They're appointed. But the costs. The equivalent organisation in Bath is effectively the Charter Trustees. I mean, there are no parishes, so we can't recharge for parish elections in Bath because there aren't any.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it should be parished.
That's a much wider discussion.
I think the point that Sean is trying to make is that that it is a bit of a running issue for those of us in North East Somerset, that there is an additional cost to residents for many services which are provided as part of the Baines Council tax in Bath, but things like grounds maintenance, play areas, there's a whole list of services out in North East Somerset, which North East Somerset residents pay additional costs for, and we're now paying for the privilege of paying for those additional costs.
I would slightly challenge the point. I think that there is an awful lot of income brought into the council through, for example, the tourism in Bath and the Roman baths, which is then redistributed heavily around the area. The redistribution of income in the city of Bath is not held to the city of Bath. So I think that there are arguments to be had in both directions around that. I would argue that the economic driver that is the city of Bath is a huge benefit to the residents of North East Somerset. I mean, the Roman Baths itself subsidises council tax to the point of £150 per head or something, or per household. So that's my first point. The second point is, I absolutely would look at special expenses for Bath. I would look closely at that, which we are allowed to do, but we can't do it because we are capped at 4.99%, so we can't make any differential, because we have to raise at 4.99% in order to make the budget work. Were we to be either uncapped or to be in a situation where we weren't having to look at 4.99% rises, I would happily look at special expenses for Bath, which is allowed. and look at the cost of parks, for example. I would happily make that look. I would happily look at that were we in a position to be able to differentiate, but we're not.
I'd make the point about Bath being the economic powerhouse that it is due to the residents of North East Somerset who can't afford to live in Bath but come in every day to provide those services within the city of Bath.
And we're very, very keen to try and build some houses, as many houses as possible around the Bath city in order to make sure that the situation gets alleviated.
I was about to comment that the local plan isn't going to make that any better anytime soon. But it's moving away slightly from the point in question. Anything else, Sean, before I chip in with my questions?
No, I think you've made the point. I mean, I would just say, you know, I mean, there's a lot of things that we have to pay for out in the sticks. I mean, if we want public toilets, we've got to pay for them. But we also pay for your public toilets in Bath. So we are already, I feel, contributing quite significantly to the pots.
And I think although this is an ongoing discussion that we have, that those of North East Somerset have had this discussion quite a few times, the reason we bring it up is there is a substantial percentage of our residents are very resentful of what they see as a second tier of council tax. And I'm not saying that in any pejorative way, but yeah, I think we're almost expected to bring it up. Can I just coming back to to the point in question? It would be interesting to see some numbers to give some context within this report about the number of by-elections that there are within the parishes and towns in North East Somerset, and how that compares particularly to the fact that many vacancies between elections are filled by co-option. Actually, election is quite unusual. And in fact, the cost of elections, an actual physical election of the towns and parishes at the same time, the Baines election, is fairly low because most of the towns and parishes are uncontested. So just again, context there. Because I don't think these charges will affect many, and touch wood, just simply because the parish and town elections are unusual. But I would put two caveats to that. One is that the cost for the wealthy boroughs like Midsummer Norton, with their precept onto the town council, will be a very, very small percentage compared to some of the parishes which maybe have a precept of less than £10,000. There's also, and I'm referring more generally, not just Baines, and I'm doing it deliberately, is that the reason that most towns and parishes fill by co-option is because those are functional towns and parishes. There are dysfunctional town and parish councils where there are contested elections, not necessarily in Baines. And if that was to occur in North East Somerset, is there provision for where you get multiple resignations and multiple elections over the space of a few years in a particular town or parish? And there's one I can think of that has the potential to go that direction. I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at you, Sean, if it's not.
Can I just make the point that, you know, in itself, it's not a big issue. I mean, to raise, for an average parish or town to raise £6,000 roughly in a year, it's probably going to add around about £3 onto the annual precept. It's just a worrying trend where we're seeing more and more being passed down to the parishes and the towns because they do have a precept that hasn't got a set limit on it. And we're seeing that our precepts are now having to increase by sort of 10, 20, 30% annually to cope. So it's just the trend that's concerning.
slightly disagree with that. There are some parishes that if you had to raise an additional £6,000, that would double the precept.
Oh, yeah, but in this scale there,
From presumably quite a small level. Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. I'm going to have to make this quick because I have got to go for a co-option meeting, funny enough, on Parish Council. But I know this has gone out to Parish Councils already, so just as a general question, what's been the kind of feedback from clerks of said Parish Councils up to now?
Aurora, can you speak to that?
I haven't received any feedback. Possibly just one parish clerk commented on the fact that the parish council were not happy about the decision. But that's the only email I received in response to the email I sent with the document with the proposed charges.
Okay, and just so how long's the gap been from the email being sent to now?
It was sent in August.
August, September, October, November. So in the last 3 months you've received one reply from every single parish clerk within?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Then moving on to the capital delivery project assurance.
Yes. Looking at time, I'll introduce this very briefly because Tom is then going to do a quick presentation for you. So this sets out the capital delivery programme, which is over 260 live projects. The key content of the report is around the centralised project management, the governance and oversight, project controls and reporting through Microsoft Project for the Web, capital programme overview, the way we're handling risk management and the assurance and continuous improvement. So I'll hand over for a report and I'll happily take questions afterwards.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Great. So, hi everyone, I'm Tom Foster. I'm head of the Capital Programme and Project Management. I'll go through these slides quickly just to set the scene and ask on the specific points that we'd like scrutiny of. The service itself is nearly 18 months old now. It was brought together to bring all the delivery of the capital programme together into one place. And as you can see from the summary on the screen, we've got 5 key areas now that cover the entire capital programme, from controls, which is the reporting, the risk management, and the software that we use to deliver, through the finance, commercial lead, so that's the procurement and the contract management of our capital programme. The programme management, so that's bringing together all the projects into one place that has a defined outcome. And then the project management, which is the delivery of the asset itself. So that's the structure of the service. What we've also done is updated the governance of the capital programme. So previously there were lots of different places that decisions were made on delivery of the capital programme. We brought that together into one place. It's worth saying that the democratic process still sits around this, of course. This is about delivering with the oversight from informal cabinet and then officer groups that have delegated responsibility to deliver and make decisions to deliver the whole programme. A quick summary of what the next 5 years looks like from the capital programme and divide it out. And this is in more detail in the report as well. And then feeding into that, how we fund that. And as you can see, the majority of that is either borrowing or grant funded. So in terms of the scrutiny itself of the assurance, we had a maturity assessment carried out on all the processes we used. And 5 key findings came out of that, as you can see on the screen there. Benefits, so why do we do the projects we do? Database and reporting, PMO structure, project professionals and governance. And so of those 5, everything I've just run through, it covers all of those apart from the training of our team. And so of those, I wanted to just give an example of the database and reporting piece, because this is the key thing we'd like some scrutiny of today, in that we've implemented a tool that effectively brings together all the schedule, the costs, the risks for our capital programme into one place. so that we can produce things like this, which is a dashboard of all the projects in one place. You can look at how projects are running, and that can be scrutinised. The assurance of that goes through that governance structure I showed you before. So it's looked at the steering groups and then fed up ultimately into informal cabinet, albeit on a monthly basis. And then finally, in the paper you'll have seen that we talk about programme-led delivery. What this means is that we bring projects together with shared defined outcomes and benefits, and the idea is that the programme is greater than the sum of its parts effectively, and so that we can link it back to the corporate strategy or the outcomes defined by informal cabinet. So that's a quick rattle through, mindful of time, and I'll leave it open to you guys to question.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Toby?
Thank you. Is this risk table a 25-point risk table? So are the impacts up to 5 and likelihoods up to 5? It seems to me the risks are pretty low, especially of cybersecurity. I certainly would never give a 1 rating to likelihoods of cyber breaches.
Yeah, I guess the numbers themselves, it's more an illustration of what we're producing, the actual risk register itself. And those numbers, as I say, would go through assurance. So those sort of questions would happen first at the steering group, then at that capital strategy group, before, again, members at an informal cabinet would have an opportunity to ask just those sort of questions.
Sorry, could I just clarify? The dashboard, is this something that councillors will have access to?
That's right, yes. So the plan is that we'll come and present it for the first time to a formal cabinet, so this is what it does and what it is. But then on a monthly basis, that will be updated, so you'll have a link into that Power BI dashboard so that you can view.
Okay, but there will be some training for councillors in the first instance.
What can you do with this and what can you see? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah. Brilliant. Thank you.
Malcolm.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. It's really good to go and see it. It looks good structure for working around things. The bit which worries me in our current financial position for things is whether borrowing 325 million over 5 years is the right thing for us to be going and doing. I know lots of that comes match funding with grants and all that sort of thing. I think what's really imperative for me then to go and see when we go through the budgeting process, which we're going to be coming through soon, is when we've got capital programmes and capital projects and things coming in then, understanding exactly what's coming in from grant, exactly what's coming from borrowing, and when and how long these things are going to be paying back, or if they're going to be paying back, because I know there's things we do which pay back in other ways other than financially, and there's times and things that's fine as well. But when we come through for that scrutiny on the budget, it would be, I think it's really important that we've got that ability to go and say, actually, yeah, we can see that this is why we're putting things above other things when we're coming to making priority choices about what should be going ahead.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things on that. And we've got the kind of P3M finance lead who interfaces directly with the capital finance team, so we have the people to do that work. But also this tool gives us the transparency to be able to ask just those sort of questions that you're talking about.
And I think also the point to make is that the borrowing there is not, we will definitely go and borrow this. That might be internal borrowing. That means that the scheme isn't funded from grant or third parties or capital or revenue. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to go straight out and borrow the money, because that's the Treasury management function. The Treasury management function is to work out where the best place for us to fund that is. So it might be taking money from our own cash for a while, or it might be, you know, it does not mean that we will immediately go out and borrow 325 million quid.
No, but the stuff which we do take then, it means we're taking it for this project rather than this project. And that's where we'd like to be able to go and make those decisions, to go and say, actually, we're going for this project because this is going to go and generate us something else, rather than we're going to go and use it to go and fund this project. Because if we do need to go and do all the projects, that's when you do need to go and take 325 million.
Well, that, not even that is true. But go on, sorry.
So we don't borrow for individual projects, so we would cash flow that to make the judgment about what we need to borrow as a quantum of the programme at particular points in time. So we don't say we're going to go out and borrow X billion for that particular project. We'll work out when we need to borrow for a whole range of different projects that are in the programme at that particular time, if we need to.
Yes, I'd appreciate that you go and do that, but then that's coming back to saying, actually, this is the set of projects we're going to go and do, and if this is the set of projects we're going to go and do, we're going to go and borrow this chunk of money to enable those to go ahead. And if we've got that information about what pays back and how long it takes to go and pay back, then we can make the decision about whether it's this block of projects we should be doing, or whether some of the ones down the bottom here should be shuffled out and something else should be shuffled in instead. If we don't, we can't scrutinise that budget properly.
Okay, I think the point I'm trying to get across is, even if we did all of the projects that pie chart represents, we still will not have borrowed £375 million. Because...
Then why does your table say that you will?
Because it's borrowing, not... Borrowing includes internal borrowing. Borrowing includes... It means that the project is not funded by grant or... It doesn't mean we have immediately gone and borrowed the money. Corporate-supported borrowing does not mean we have gone and borrowed money from the Public Works Loan Fund to do that thing. That isn't how it works. The Treasury Management function sits there kind of going, OK, what's our cash flow look like? What do we actually need to borrow? If you look in the MTFS report, I think it is the MTFS report that has the chart, doesn't it, with the gap between the borrowing requirement and where we actually are.
Yeah.
And that graph shows you the gap between what we have flagged as corporate-supported borrowing projects and what we have actually gone and borrowed. And that's the job of Treasury Management, is to keep that gap as big as possible.
And there is a danger of that principle that it doesn't matter how many times you weigh the cat and measure the cat, it doesn't necessarily make it a happier cat or a healthier cat, in that we can look at statistics and to the nth degree, but you're spending the time measuring and weighing. That said, I think it's interesting to look at the amount of external borrowing from Public Works Loan Board at any point in time, because at the same time as new borrowing, you should have expired borrowing at a similar point in time.
Absolutely right, and I mean that was the question Gary answered earlier about the refinancing. And again, part of the job of Treasury Management is to make sure that your refinancing is done in an appropriate way, and that you're not going out and borrowing money when rates are high if you don't have to, and that you can delay the borrowing. So you take the first 6 months of this year, or so far this financial year, I don't believe we've taken out any new long-term financial borrowing. I think our borrowing number is the same now as it was at the beginning of the financial year. But we have expended lots of expenditure that will have been flagged as corporate-supported borrowing. There will be projects that have gone ahead that were flagged as corporate-supported borrowing. We haven't gone and borrowed the money. We've done something internally to shift budgets around to fund that for a bit. And I say that the gap in the MTFS is on that chart. The gap between the borrowing requirement and the actual level of borrowing is that gap.
Sean, then Toby, looking at the time, it is 3 minutes past 6.
Sorry, I understand what you're saying, but surely then this graph should be detailed in a way that because that doesn't reflect what we're doing, and I find it quite misleading the way it's been presented there.
It really isn't misleading, and it's not supposed to be misleading. What that is saying that those projects will be allocated from corporate-supported borrowing. You then need to understand what corporate-supported borrowing means. Corporate-supported borrowing doesn't mean going out and borrowing from the Public Works Loan Fund. Corporate-supported borrowing means financed from council's funding, not from an external source.
Projects that are not self-sustaining in terms of investment.
Yeah, well, I say, not third-party funded, not grant funded, not funded from capital receipts, not funded from revenue.
But that's just like saying that if I'm buying a new car at home and I'm lucky enough to have enough money in savings and don't need to go and take a new personal loan out, that I've effectively funded it internally. That money still is no longer available to go and spend on some other project.
That is absolutely true. Yes, absolutely, that is true. Yes, but it doesn't mean we've gone and borrowed it. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Can I just make the point, Chair, that Treasury management as an activity is part of the Audit Committee's remit, so it looks at Treasury management, our borrowing, our choices, our investment, risk appetite, everything around that is covered in the Audit Committee's scrutiny. Going back to the detailed question which you rightly raised, Malcolm, is there's a connection between that level of scrutiny around how we go about borrowing and investments, which is not necessarily the same answer connected to your question around the budget and what you expect to see around scrutiny. So, you know, so that was just want to make that clear.
Toby.
Sorry, apologies. Can we move on to the next slide, which looks at Parks programme structure? I'm just slightly worried about the accountability if the programme management team is running a programme. I'll give an example that in the park in my ward in Sydney Gardens, the swings needed replacement for technical reasons, but somebody got in the way of getting that done before the summer holidays, so there weren't any swings for the entire summer holidays, which would have been a small, tiny procurement job. And this appears to say that equipment replacement is not accountable through the parks team, and therefore the parks manager isn't able to exercise it. Is that a fair criticism?
No, so this is an example of a programme structure, but actually the project sponsor is the parks team, and that's what this doesn't say, is that the commissioning service is the sponsor, and so we're delivering on behalf of that team.
The accountability, you think, stays with parks management?
Yes. Responsibility is with us, accountability stays with that team, yes.
Whereas if it's North East Somerset, we'd have to raise the precept.
I'm going to stop biting.
If there's no further questions, then thank you for that report. That was useful to as much as in terms of a discussion about treasury management as about capital funding. Moving quickly on to the panel work plan. I think we are fairly busy for the next few meetings with the budget, and I guess that we will be getting more information over the next few weeks as the fair funding formula becomes clearer and how that works. Anything to add? Anyone has to add to the work plan?
AI from the council.
Oh, yes. Can we include AI on that work plan, as that was referred across from full council last week? And the discussion we had earlier is, while it will come to this panel, it may well be that some small group work rather than discussing within a formal structure would be useful. Is that okay?
I think that's good. I think it would be good to invite a member of a representative of the Green Group as well, as it was their proposal they made in council.
I'll tell Joanna that good, inviting Green Group are included in the same sentence. Jess?
I was going to say the same thing, that whilst it might sit under this committee, the working group could draw in a few people that know about it, are interested in it.
Yes. And I think it goes back to the earlier point of there are any number of cross-cutting issues which actually going back into silos is not helpful or a useful way of dealing with things. Sean, the last word.
Sorry, yeah, I'm in if your work land, so I'm just passing through, so that's fine with me. I'm just going to say, obviously, we are heading towards the budget, and it would be useful if this committee or all committees could make it clear to groups and group leaders the format that they're going to be adopting for the budget discussions and how we can feed into those. That would be very useful.
I think the format is that the 3 panels will meet, and as panels will make recommendations against their particular areas with the budget. Then there will be a meeting of all 3 panels together, which will be convened by this panel to come up with a more corporate scrutiny response, where I will report on behalf of scrutiny to the budget meeting in February. That is different from individual councillors and political groups actually making their own recommendations or amendments as part of the budget process.
Okay, I'm thinking more of the fact that groups and group leaders and councillors will more likely to attend your meetings than the empty seats you've got today for the budget, and would want to have some input into it.
I think we're talking about budget items which relate to this panel on the 27th of Jan, and then all 3 panels on the 3rd of Feb, is that right? That's what I mean.
Yeah, I think what we're working with officers, but the firm proposal is we bring the draft budget the first week of February, so we put an additional meeting in, take savings proposals to the other panels, but not necessarily for resources, but that on the 27th. And I think there's a decision to be made. We probably discussed this outside whether that meeting on the 27th is necessary. No, we put the additional meeting in to scrutinise the draft budget in the first week of February.
A lot of it depends on the point at which officers and Cabinet are clear about what fair funding formula and what the overall budget picture looks like, and how quickly can get it out in early January. Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks all for attending. Apologies, we've gone 11 minutes over my 2-hour set for whatever, but and don't see people beforehand. Have a happy December and Christmas and all the rest of the stuff.